The following program is made possible by Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
Growth, traffic, infrastructure, and change. What did voters say about these pressing issues in the November election?
We get some answers from two community leaders at the center of the issues. The game is politics. The game is on.
Hi, I'm Kevin Mullen.
And I'm Mark Simon. Welcome to the game.
The issues of growth and construction were on nearly every ballot in last month's election, either as a central issue in a city council campaign or in the form of Measure W, the countywide sales tax increase that would provide money for transit and transportation projects and narrowly eclipse that difficult two-thirds threshold. What signals did voters send about these changes taking place in our community and the economics behind those changes?
We talked with two leaders who were in the midst of these issues. Rosanne Foust, President and CEO of the San Mateo County Economic Development Association. Thank you for being here. And Charles Stone, member of the Belmont City Council and chair of the Samtrans Board of Directors. Both of them were heavily involved in the leadership of the Yes on Measure W campaign. Thank you both for joining us. Let's start off by talking about Measure W. As Kevin indicated, it just slipped over the two-thirds threshold. It seems odd to think of that because it's such a huge 2-to-1 margin. In any other election, it would be a landslide, but you know, some hundreds of votes got it over. What do you think it signals about this election? What does he think it signals about the voters in this county and what's on their mind in passing Measure W? Charles?
Well, I think it confirms what we already knew, which is probably the number one issue on everyone's mind up and down the peninsula is traffic and transportation. Folks have told us at a local level, at a regional level, and a statewide level that they are sick of sitting in traffic and, you know, taking 30 minutes to get to a destination 2 miles away is not acceptable to them anymore. And what this tells me is that they understand the reality, which is in order to do the types of things that are going to disrupt this massive amount of traffic congestion, we needed more revenue. And this shows that San Mateo County, as it has in the past, is willing to tax itself to make life here better for everybody.
Rosanne, there's been some, I don't know if controversy is the right word, but there's been some complaints from a fairly small group of people that there was a surge of votes in support of this late in the counting. It's hard to know if it was late in the balloting because who knows when. What's your take on all of that?
Well, first of all, when you have voter turnout that is just shy of 73%, this is the highest voter turnout since 1982 in San Mateo County, according to our elections chief. And I don't think about it as a surge. I think about it as we collectively approached it as a big tent. And we involved all the stakeholders. I want to especially call out Team C and those with Transform and Friends of Caltrain and Safe Routes to School and Menlo Spark. They were actively engaged. They were out there knocking on doors at the Caltrain station. They really were our ground game. And that's what an election is all about. It's about raising the money, getting the message out, and having a good ground game. And that's what we did. And the votes proved it.
Charles, what's Samtrans going to do with this money? It's a lot of money that Samtrans hasn't had. And we should add, I worked there for many years. I was actually involved in the early stages of preparing this ballot measure. But, as the chair of Samtrans, what does this money mean to you?
I can't even begin to overstate the importance. It would be impossible. We go from a district that was looking very seriously at having to make cuts to what really is essential lifeline service for a lot of folks who make under $50,000 household income. I'm going to say that again because it really drives home an important point. A lot of our riders, over 50%, I believe, make less than $50,000 a year, not individually, household. These folks literally have no other chance to get from point A to point B. If we had to start cutting these routes, that means these folks are going to probably leave the area, to be blunt. because at that point they can't get to their job and it's just not worth it to deal with the high cost of living anymore. We go from that agency to an agency that's going to be able to run a robust express bus service. Transition more quickly to an all-electric fleet, which is incredibly important for many reasons, not the least of which is it helps us do our part to combat climate change. An agency that can take a robust look at things like microtransit, which is smaller vehicles that can make smaller trips more efficiently than buses. It enables us to, as you've heard us say many times, leave the scarcity mentality behind that I think was handicapping us and move into a mentality of what new and innovative things can we do to disrupt traffic congestion.
Before we totally leave the election dynamic and the counting of the ballots dynamic, I just wanted to note, some folks have expressed surprise that those very, very late counted ballots, the late breaking ballots, if you will, are the ones that put Measure W over the top. The reality is the trend statewide was that the late counted ballots broke in a progressive direction. This is not only a San Mateo County dynamic. This is the way it was working throughout the state with absentee
So
ballots.
voter fraud was widespread, is what you're saying.
Absolutely no voter fraud. Let me be clear. No voter fraud, unlike what's happening in North Carolina, by the way, which is actual voter fraud. None of that is happening in San Mateo County or the state. And so those late ballots broke in a progressive direction. So I actually expected this thing to, at the very end of the day, get across the finish line. But there was also questions about, well, usually these things pass by a really pretty healthy margin above the 2/3 threshold. The reality is, on this ballot, we had an effort to repeal the gas tax, which reminded voters that they are paying a new gas tax. We just came off passing Regional Measure 3, a toll increase. So there's a lot of investment already happening in transportation. The key is this local pot of money will leverage funds from the region and the state. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that dynamic too, of how all of these things interrelate, the state money, the regional money, and now the local pot, which is key to accessing some of those funds. So all of this works together. It's kind of a complicated message to convey to the public.
And I think that is so important. And I will tell you, the business community who funded this campaign primarily to the tune of about $1.1 million, many of them are SAMCETA members. And they saw the leveraging perspective. And that is something consistently over our 67-year history. We have partnered with those that we see the local control issues and the fact that you can leverage transportation dollars. If you're able to raise money locally, then you have a much, much better opportunity at regional, state, and federal money. And we have done it consistently. And I mean, there's so many examples that we can give, from Measure A in 1988 to the 2004 reauthorization to the Caltrain electrification, from the state dollars to the full funding grant agreement for Caltrain from the federal authorities. I mean, it all works together. And being a self-help county when it regards transportation, I mean, the business community is 100% behind that, and I'm proud to be a part of it.
I want to talk a little bit about the sort of the larger dynamics, the state of the peninsula economy. It seems to be growing and booming along at a rate that has begun to be uncomfortable. You talk about the traffic, and it's a direct result of prosperity, I guess, for lack of a better word. What is the state of the economy, and is there a recession in the offing? And how much of that was an issue in this campaign?
So as far as the economy is concerned, I mean, it depends on which economists that you talk to on any given day, or the way that the market has been very volatile the last 6 weeks, where you have wide swings. Mark Vittner, the economist with Wells Fargo that was recently a part of our organization's economic outlook along with the Redwood City Chamber, he said he sees growth slowing, but slowing is still 2.5% growth. So you have to look at it in the big picture perspective. Are we going to have the huge growth and the jobs that constantly are being created? I'm not sure, but people have been talking about the demise of Silicon Valley probably for the last 30 years, and it has not happened. We have an incredible churn here, from companies that might die or merge or move, but new companies replace them. People want to be here. We are in an enviable position in that perspective.
We're going to come back to this topic, but we have to take a quick break. Stick around. We'll be right back here on The Game.
It's been over 150 years since Wells Fargo first opened for business. Since then, we've enjoyed your community support, and we're passionate about returning it. Every day, Wells Fargo team members roll up their sleeves and donate their time to organizations and charitable groups throughout the Bay Area. Nationally, we've committed even more. In just the past 2 years alone, we've donated over $70 million to support schools and educational programs. It's a commitment we're proud of. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
Welcome back to the game. I'm Mark Simon. He's Kevin Mullen. Over here we have Charles Stone, Chair of the Samtrans Board of Directors in Belmont City Council, and Rosanne Foust, President and CEO of SamCEDA. Charles, you just ran for re-election. You got re-elected. Congratulations. Finished third, though.
He did not finish third. I'm going to interrupt you because there were 3
And did you
seats.
have to bring that up anyway?
There were 3
well,
seats.
that's me.
He came in first in one of those seats. That's how you have to look at
Okay. Okay.
Wow.
He was first in the CD1. He got the
Yes.
third number of votes, but that's okay. Talk about positive spin.
Actually, the price of leadership is sometimes you alienate some sectors of the community.
Versus me, who alienates everybody.
Sure.
Yes, I understand. But you just finished
But we
the
love
campaign.
you.
How much was the economy, even if it wasn't specifically talked about, part of the campaign debate?
A huge part, because as we know, the economy is the driver in many ways of our traffic issues, of our growth issues. And while I would have preferred to talk about many different things, because at the end of the day, being a council member isn't just about land use decisions, this election in Belmont, at least, was really a referendum on our growth decisions and our general plan and our Belmont Village specific plan and the future of this town in terms of growth. Well, we're not in it right now, that town. I want to congratulate Denise Boble for running a campaign that captured many people's ideas that aren't necessarily enamored with the idea of any growth at all. I look at 4- and 5-story buildings and I don't think that's high density. They think it is, and that's where we have our meatiest disagreement. But I think it's hard to say that the people of Belmont haven't spoken, because this election was framed in that regard. In Redwood City, you had a version of the same thing with someone like Giselle Hale coming in first place, who is definitely an advocate of continued growth. I think the tight wire act we have to perform is bringing a lot of those people along and really helping to explain to them why it's necessary to build homes near the job centers. Because I've said it over and over again, there's people that are just never going to listen, and that's fine. But there are folks you can reach when you explain it to them like this. Who were your neighbors 30 to 40 years ago when you moved in here and bought your house? And inevitably, they'll tell you, it was Bob, and he was a mechanic, and Joe was a firefighter, and, Jim was a dentist. Well, guess what? Those people can't afford to buy houses here anymore. And sometimes that helps them realize that the only chance we have at giving our kids, the type of folks who work in the types of jobs that made this San Mateo County, where Kevin and I got to grow up, so incredible, the only way we can ensure they still have a chance to live here is by building housing and building affordable housing. If we leave it the status quo, prices are just going to continue to go up, because at its very base, this is a supply and demand problem.
So we like to say that transportation and housing are 2 sides of the same coin. I think I heard Robert Reich say that at one of our caucus discussions, and I've been using it ever since. But there is a line of truth to that. We talked about the quantum leap of investment in transportation infrastructure. Explain for the people of San Mateo County how that kind of investment can actually help address the affordable housing crisis that we are all living through. And then, of course, there's that tension with scale of growth and all of that, which happens on that local land use level. But big picture, how transportation and housing are linked, and how the progress we're making on one can actually lead to some progress in the other, and
Sure.
what some of the challenges are therein.
Rosanne, why don't you try that question?
Well, I was going to start with Bay Meadows. Bay Meadows development is probably one of the best examples we have in this county about how those 2 things work together. So you have homes, you have jobs, and you have transit. And the Bay Meadows residents and the ones that work there use transit. They use it all the time. And so the need for parking and what was anticipated has changed dramatically from when that project began to what it is today. I mean, that to me, everyone in this county should walk around Bay Meadows and see what it represents. It has beautiful open space, it has retail, it has restaurants, it has housing, and it has jobs. I mean, honestly, that's what we need to look more at.
Charles.
I think that's a great example, and for me, it's near and dear to my heart because I actually grew up in the San Mateo Village, just across Hillsdale from Bay Meadows. I saw all the changes happening. I remember the hyperbole and the sky is falling comments, and this was going to be awful. We'd lose the racetrack, and you'd never be able to go anywhere again because there'd be gridlock. Well, traffic is coming no matter what. We know that. Folks are driving in from Livermore, from Stockton, from Gilroy, from Roseville. I know people personally who drive in from Roseville every day to work in the Bay Area. If we enable folks to live closer to where they work, they're on the road for less time. It simply is a fact that we can't get around. The flip side of the coin, as Assemblymember Mullen pointed out, is we have to provide folks with viable public transit alternatives if we're going to have them living closer to their jobs. I don't want someone who works 10 miles away from San Mateo to feel like they have to get in their car to go 10 miles south to Google or wherever they're going, Facebook. I want them to be able to get on Caltrain and take microtransit from Caltrain to where they're going, to their campus, and never touch a car. That should be our goal. The rub is money. It's always money. This type of, kind of quantum leap takes a lot of cash. And that's going back to a question you asked several questions ago. That's where this partnership effort between the state, between regional, between county, between local, all comes together. Because we can leverage this Measure W money along with RM3 funds and SB1 funds. And when you cobble that all together, then these what seem like impossible projects because they cost so much start to become viable.
Yeah, and it's studies have shown millennials, which is actually the fastest growing part of our population. People used to think it was seniors, and it used to be seniors, but it's really millennials now because they're the ones who can afford to move in here with double incomes. They don't want cars. They want to get out of their cars. They want a car-free day-to-day life. They'll have a car for excursions, but they really want to give up their car. We're going to take another quick break. Stick around. We'll be right back.
It's been over 150 years since Wells Fargo first opened for business. Since then, we've enjoyed your community support, and we're passionate about returning it. Every day, Wells Fargo team members roll up their sleeves and donate their time to organizations and charitable groups throughout the Bay Area. Nationally, we've committed even more. In just the past 2 years alone, we've donated over $70 million to support schools and educational programs. It's a commitment we're proud of. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
Welcome back to the game. I'm Mark Simon. Kevin Mullen is over here. Over here we have Charles Stone, chair of the San Mateoans Board of Directors, and Rosanne Foust, president and CEO of SamCETA. We were just talking about this, and I think one of the questions is sort of the mood of the voters in the context of a campaign, especially with things like Nextdoor and other Facebook pages that really become sort of soapboxes for people. You hear a lot of negative, and a lot of the negative is, I don't like the way my community is changing. So the first question is that the way it's going to be anyway? And does this reflect the mood of a lot of voters, or do you think that the election showed is that that's actually a minority point of view, it's just a noisy minority? Rosanne.
I think sometimes what you have to do is look at it in context. And I know when I was an elected official, when I read something or had an interaction, I would call the person up, which usually floored them because that surprised them. Because most of the time people write things about people they don't know, have never interacted with, they just see one side of it. So one by one, if you try to engage folks, but then you have to come to a point. I stopped going on Nextdoor 3 years ago because it's just too negative for me. And from my perspective, you have to keep working the issues and really kind of put some of the noise by the wayside. Happy people don't come out to council meetings. Happy people don't complain. I mean, people who are working and engaged with their children's youth sports and engaged in civic organizations, they're moving right along. So it's a matter of keeping track of who in your community that feels left behind. That is a big problem. That was a problem nationally in 2016 with the current administration coming into office. People feel left behind. So how do you capture some of those? You need to accept, though, 20 to 25% of the population will always be unhappy, not satisfied, and not on your side. That is a reality. So how much time do you want to really spend on it?
Charles, in the Belmont election, that issue was starkly drawn. You did have three candidates, three incumbents running, essentially saying, keep going, we're doing what we think we want. We got one candidate who was genuinely and diametrically opposed and really spoke for all those people, however many there might be, who said, I want Belmont back the way it was. What's your reaction to that?
Like you, like Assemblymember Mullen, I grew up here, and we've seen that the only constant is change. I mean, that sounds cliche, but you think about it, you go back 80, 90 years, and Belmont was rolling hills with very few trees, by the way. It's always fascinating to hear people say the development's going to get rid of the trees. If you actually look at the historical context, development brought trees. It used to look like the hills around Stanford. It's going to change. The question is, how do we manage that change? And I think where we can do a better job, where I can do a better job, and I'm going to try to do a better job, is really listening to those folks who aren't in the bucket of, I'm never going to change my mind, it needs to look like it did in 1972, and if you're not going to do that, I don't want to talk to you. Unfortunately, there's not a lot I can do with that. But folks who are open to meeting with me and listening, I've tried to do it, I'm going to do even more. I want them to understand why I think that we need to work on managing the change. I cannot think of a time in the peninsula's history where it remained static. It's been changing all along the way, and you can say that about our region as well. And San Francisco did their best job possible at one point to become a city of no growth. For a quote-unquote big city, they decided they weren't going to be a big city. The results of that mentality were disastrous for all of us. They are being borne out today in the form of $3,000 and $4,000 rents and $1.5 to $3 million home prices, and the realization that for the first time that I can remember, our next generation simply doesn't have a realistic chance of living where they grew up. And I'm not saying everybody deserves that or is entitled to that, but it would be nice if it was possible for some of them that wanted to. And barring incredibly wealthy parents, getting a really, really good job somewhere, which is becoming harder and harder, even though we have this robust economy, the competition is fierce, or winning the lottery, I don't know how my 15-year-old is going to ever buy a home or even rent a home on the peninsula. In fact, both of my kids at 15 and 13 have already kind of come to the conclusion that they aren't going to be able to stay here, and that just breaks my heart.
So election 2018, now in the rearview mirror, both of you are political junkies and analysts. What did we learn from this election cycle locally? We had a diverse pool of candidates, we had high turnout, but the folks that got returned to office versus turned out of office, did either of you see trend lines that are something that we should seize on and maybe anticipate as we go into the next big election cycle of 2020? What are some of your takeaways from observing not only Measure W, but some of the local council races and just the mood of the public?
I worry about district elections. And I will be perfectly honest. We in San Mateo County don't have one large city like San Francisco, Oakland, and San Jose. We have 20 individual cities. When you start slicing and dicing smaller communities into districts, people don't think regionally anymore. And I think from our San Mateo County perspective, we need to think regionally because sometimes we aren't invited to the table. And that's one of the things Samcita works on every single day, is having a seat at that regional table, because that's how we're going to accomplish the big things on housing.
The mayor of San Mateo County that we are yearning for?
Well, I nominate Charles. What do you think?
He's sitting right here.
Yeah, I'm sure he'll decline.
But thinking about it.
But of course, that's always been one of the advantages, too, which is that everybody works together in this county in ways they don't in other counties. In Santa Clara County, there's a huge amount of resentment towards San Jose that genuinely affects the politics and even countywide ballot measures. So there's always a trade-off. My thought is it's like, so somebody can just step forward. We have people who have the capacity, people at this table have the capacity to say, I'm going to assert San Mateo County's interests on a regional level. Charles, your answer to Kevin's question. We got 1 minute left.
I think the trends I saw were being a progressive matters on the peninsula. Progressive candidates did well. I think that the loose coalition of folks who don't like change at all can continue to win a seat here or there, and you saw that. But I think by and large, people spoke and said that they're okay with some measured, smart growth. I think we saw that in Belmont. I think we saw it in Redwood City. We definitely saw it in San Carlos. And I think that's probably going to continue, because I think as more and more folks that you mentioned who can, the people who can afford to buy homes here tend to be of a mindset, afford to rent here, tend to be of a mindset that some limited smart growth is a good idea, and they'd love to see the transit corridor built out with the stipulation that they want to see robust public transit to get to and from work.
Charles Stone, Rosanne Foust, thank you so much for being with us. And thank you for being with us, and join us next time on The Game. I'm Mark Simon.
I'm Kevin Mullen.
We'll see you soon.